We know something's wrong with the Phoenix Suns, but we don't fully know what. And we know something needs to change, but we don't know what's really possible. On today's episode of Locked On Suns, I'll try to answer both questions.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 7 seasons, a writer at Suns.com, and the host of the Just Basketball Show wherever you get your podcasts. A big thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen. To kick off your Thursday, welcome to the show. If you have not already, hit follow or subscribe wherever you're finding us. We're free and available everywhere, including YouTube. So just hit the follow or subscribe button. Get a new show, a new episode in your feed Monday through Friday. Become an everydayer. Get locked onto the Suns right along with me all season long. I'm going to try to make sense of where we are in the Suns season. I know we've been doing that for about 2 weeks, but I'm going to zoom out today, and I'm going to try to hit on all of the different things that I see going around online, on television, in Suns fans, conversations with Suns fans that I know, and try to get to the bottom of what exactly is ailing this team. But I want to start by saying this is by no means a lost cause, all right? I want to look back to last season, all right? When, if you go to Basketball Reference, you can look at NBA standings by date, all right? December 20th, Western Conference standings. Denver Nuggets tied with the Memphis Grizzlies for number one, the number one seed at 19-11. Where are the Grizzlies now? Where were they even by the end of the regular season? Still the 2 seed, but a lot had changed. The New Orleans Pelicans were the 3 seed. The Phoenix Suns were the 4 seed. The Clippers were the 5 seed. Kings 6. Guess who was the 7th seed in the Western Conference on December 20th of 2022? The Portland Trailblazers. Number 8, Utah Jazz. Number 9, the Minnesota Timberwolves. And numbers 11 and 12 were the 15 and 17 Warriors and the 13 and 17 Los Angeles Lakers. Obviously, shortly after this happened, you had, or maybe even it had already happened, the New Orleans Pelicans suffer an injury to Zion Williamson. The Grizzlies suffer an injury to Steven Adams, a suspension for John Morant, or a stepping away by John Morant. Obviously, the Blazers and the Jazz fall down the standings. You see the Warriors get Andrew Wiggins back. The Lakers make a big trade. And the Dallas Mavericks, who I didn't even say, were at number 10, eventually would make a trade to improve their team with Kyrie Irving, but then still not even make the play-in game. So that's just some context, all right? And I wanted to start on an optimistic note. But I said this when Devin Booker had a clunker against the Lakers in the NBA Cup quarterfinal game in Staples Center, Crypto.com Arena. We tend to be at our lowest as fans and followers and people who care about sports and teams and players when we don't understand what's going on. And so I think that's the place to start here. A lot of what's going on with the Suns is unexplainable, makes no sense. It's impossible to wrap your mind around it. Guys messing up routine plays, turnovers on simple passes that any basketball player has been making since they were in elementary school. Defensive breakdowns on simple plays that, as I'll get into, they have no business botching. I was thinking about that when I watched a clip from NBA Today on ESPN on Wednesday where Becky Hammon, the reigning back-to-back WNBA champion head coach of the Las Vegas Aces, was questioning the toughness of this team. And she was having a hard time putting words to what she was watching. And I think it was something very relatable even to Suns fans who wanted to work even more than Becky Hammon, who is a, third-party observer. Kendrick Perkins came in with the sledgehammer and called them out, called them soft, everything else. I'm not really going to engage in that a ton, but I do think that a level of go get it attitude explains a lot of this, and it does crop up in tangible, explainable ways, but the fact that it's not there and the fact that it hits so many different areas of the game is the problem. There was a quote from Eric Gordon post-game in Portland that Dwayne Rankin was kind enough to post for all of us and include in his article over at AZ Central, which you should be checking out his work. He said, quote, Gordon did, right? We just need to be more real with ourselves into having an unselfish mindset going into games. That's a little bit frightening. Let me click X out of that NBA standings by date tab. That's enough to make you forget the record. That's a big eyebrow-raising quote. And I know the temptation is to read into those types of quotes and say, who is he talking about, and this and that. I think if you're talking about the Blazers game, which is obviously what his mind was still probably thinking about, it's not hard to figure out where he was looking. And it was because it was the whole team. They came out in the first quarter. Clearly the game plan, the emphasis from the coaching staff was move the ball quickly, play fast, be unselfish, share the ball, and you're going to be unguardable. And sure enough, they were unguardable. They went away from that, and they lost a game that they had no business losing. So, of course, Gordon would say something like that. But nevertheless, it speaks to the ISO ball and the stagnation of the offense that we're seeing, right? And I don't think it's any one person's fault, because I know people can, depending on what era of Suns fan you are or how you came to this team or whether you followed Kevin Durant here with your allegiances, you're going to feel like one star player or the other should get more reps. That's just how this goes. But both players tend to lean into ISO ball and have definitely done that this season. And definitely done that the past 2 weeks. So I don't think it's as simple as saying, well, put the ball in so-and-so's hands because I like that guy better. No, that's not going to fix it. This team was built to share. This team was built to be egalitarian, to be balanced, to have role players who can shoot and make good decisions with the ball in their hands. And that roster is still here, but it's not happening. It's unexplainable. The other quote that jumped out to me coming off of that Tuesday night loss was from Drew Eubanks. We just left our foot off the gas a little bit. And he was asked why, and he said, I don't know. We don't know either, watching this thing. It's unexplainable. It feels like it's unexplainable to anybody in that locker room. And so I think where you have to come back, because we can't know the answers to some of these things, and I don't always think it's any of our business, because it's not really likely that it's one thing, right? It's not so-and-so does such and such, and that's why this team is this and that way. That's not how this works. It's all of these things. They all probably have a kernel of truth. What we might say about them, what Perkins and Hammond on ESPN might say about them, what the locker room is saying about itself, there's probably pieces of all of it that adds up to a pretty awful product right now, a pretty awful recipe that is not winning games. And so where I go to wrap my long-winded sentence there up is that it has to come down to leadership. It has to come down to whatever the collection of people is, whatever voice is going to become the loudest and rise to the top, has to do that in a hurry without fear of consequences or retribution. It has to be that somebody takes an effective tact with everyone else involved here and puts at least the emotional burden of this team on their shoulders and gets them out of it. And I don't know who that is. I honestly don't care who that is. It should be the star players, ideally. There's no veteran leader on this team that's not a star. Frank Vogel was kind of brought in to be a little bit of an anti-Monty Williams in that way, so I don't envision him becoming a fully new leader. Not that he's not leading the team, but I don't think he's going to suddenly be a massively galvanizing voice in that locker room. That doesn't seem to be his approach, and he's been successful with it. So, is it somebody they brought? The Pacers just signed James Johnson to kind of fill this void a little bit. Do the Suns look to do something similar? Are there legs to a PJ Tucker buyout, for instance? Is it a trade, which we'll get to later in the show? I don't know. But when it's unexplainable, rather than panic and accuse people of things and point fingers and place blame, I'm going to understand that the solution might not be obvious either, just like the problems aren't obvious. It's in the fiber of the team right now, and someone needs to unthread it. What is explainable? There's plenty there as well. We'll get into it next. First, today's show brought to you by eBay Motors. Our partners at eBay Motors this season have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week all season long. So whether you're prepping for a daily draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you the players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. Let's see who Josh has picked out for us on this week's eBay Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. Let's start with the Suns angle here. Grayson Allen with Brad Beal out, of course. Allen is in the starting lineup and producing and involved. Same can be said for Brandon Pajemski, although I believe he may have tweaked something and gone out of Tuesday night's game in Boston. Tari Eason, firmly in the rotation, not starting, but obviously a guy who fills up the box score for the Rockets. James Wiseman, with a bunch of center injuries for the Detroit Pistons, is producing. And Malachi Branham has replaced... Who did he replace? Zach Collins in the starting lineup out in San Antonio. He's making his threes. He's low on turnovers. He is a guy you want. Josh Lloyd from Locked On Fantasy Basketball is going to help you win your fantasy championship. And eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. I have bought numerous items from eBay Motors, including a flap-down sunshade on the interior driver's side to keep the Arizona sun out of my eyes when the original one cracked off. I have purchased a wheel cover after my original rolled off of the car as I was headed downtown to cover a Suns game. Whether it is brake kits, LED headlights, roof rack bumpers, or my odds and ends with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly with eBay Motors. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, with these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash, so keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Keeping the show rolling, let's talk about what is explainable before we get to that. Join the Locked On Suns Insider text alerts that I send out daily, straight to your phone. My first reaction to all Suns news and rumors, where I scour the internet for everything Suns related so you don't have to, and give you my thoughts first before I ever record my podcast thoughts on it. Game day content and observations on each and every game day of the season, and exclusive videos breaking down something going on the court in Suns land each week with a private link sent directly to your phone. You can also respond to me, engage with me. I'll be doing Q&As and giveaways as we grow that subscriber list. So join the Locked On Suns Insiders now and be in the know about the Suns all the time. The link is in the show description to sign up, so just scroll down and click that, or visit joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSuns. Let's get to another quote. And this one is the most explainable thing of all. Whatever we do, we've got to get into it without putting too much pressure on ourselves late in the clock. Whatever action we're in, We try to get into it with 15, 16, 14 on the clock as opposed to 10 or 8 on the clock. And that quote is from the mouth of Kevin Durant. Okay? The Suns have risen. They are no longer 30th in pace, which I use offensive seconds to shot on pbpstats.com. If you're unfamiliar, because I know this is getting a lot of attention now online about pace, if you look at pace at Basketball Reference or elsewhere, you're going to see possessions per game. That is affected by the defense, right? Or the opponent, let's say, right? Because you could be playing fast. If the other team plays slow, the total possessions are going to be lower. It's not only up to you. Offensive seconds to shot, offensive pace, as PBP Stats calls it, is solely based on where is the shot clock when you take your first field goal attempt of a possession. So, the Suns are 27th now. Throw a party, throw a celebration. They've moved up in the world, but it is still not anywhere near where it needs to be, and it is causing a lot of the problems, right? I think that it's understandable, even if it's frustrating, to watch Booker, Durant, Jordan Goodwin, Grayson Allen, Eric Gordon, either of them, any of them, dribble the ball out because they run one action, they're not in a flow, and the shot clock is ticking and ticking and ticking. Totally makes sense. And a lot can be solved by simply, as we have now evidence of, playing the way they played in the first quarter against the Blazers on Tuesday night. The other thing that's explainable is the roster moves that got the Suns here. And this is another thing that I think Suns fans are understandably having a little bit of buyer's remorse on the trades that happened, wondering what could have been. I'm here to tell you that this series of events, in the case of the Durant trade, maybe I could hear an argument. I don't agree with it. I think you do that trade. It's Kevin Durant under contract for 3.5 years. You do it every single time, in my opinion. And I am, as anyone on YouTube watching can see, the biggest Mikal Bridges fan you will ever find. And I still believe that. But whatever. We can at least pick nits on the Durant trade, especially what was given up in that trade. However, at that time, it's hard to imagine doing much better. If you're making a case that they shouldn't have done the version of the trade that they did, you're probably looking at it as, hey, if you don't give up all the players and all the picks, maybe you have some ammunition to go out and do a little bit more, add some depth. And I can't argue with you there. But that's a pretty small potatoes part of what's happening in the grander context. When it comes to the Bradley Beal trade, I don't think you could have possibly done much better than you did. You traded second-round picks, pick swaps, and two guys who were ineffective in the postseason in Chris Paul and Landry Shamet for a guy who has made multiple All-Star teams and an All-NBA team in his career and is a solid fit with what you had. I'm not sure what else you could possibly convince yourself would have been better than that. There's no world where the Suns were getting a, Fred VanVleet or OG Anunoby or some of these things that were out there. It was not going to happen. I think the best version of a Chris Paul trade looks a lot like what the Wizards were able to get for him, which was Jordan Poole and one pick. If you wanted Jordan Poole and one pick, have at it. I don't think that that's what was going to solve this problem. I think Bradley Beal is the best thing that they could have done with those assets, which brings us to another explainable problem. But before that, I want to remind you as well of the roster moves, because Beal's an explainable part of this problem, and I understand the frustration over his injuries. But I will, again, repeat to you that that was the best that they were going to do with their assets. But again, as I said, I'm zooming out in this episode. Big picture. February of 2023, the day before the Suns made the Durant trade, we were seeing how bleak their outlook was. The players, aside from Devin Booker, failed to step up when injuries hit in December and January. Chris Paul, Mikal Bridges, DeAndre Ayton, all of them had all the opportunity in the world to prove that they could do more. It did not happen. Cam Johnson came back and was himself, but we know the ceiling of what Cam Johnson is. They had no valuable, interesting young players on rookie contracts. None. Zero. I guess Cam Johnson counts, but we knew he was due for a new deal, and they denied him an extension, so I don't really count him. He is now making $100 million over 4 years with the Brooklyn Nets, so that's where that was headed. They had nothing else. So the fact that it became Cam Johnson and Mikal Bridges is a byproduct of drafting. It is a byproduct of the Ricky Rubio and Kelly Oubre for Chris Paul trade. It is a byproduct of any number of other moves that got them where they eventually got. The things that led to where the roster is right now started way before February. And that's why it's explainable. That's why we understand how it led here and why there is not a lot of depth, why the trades had to be what they were, and why the roster now sits as it sits. Roster-wise, Beal's absence is a perfectly explainable part of how we got here. He hasn't played. Frank Vogel likes to use the term continuity disadvantage, and I think it's pretty apt. That's what the Suns are being faced with right now. Elsewhere on the roster, defensive personnel. There's not a lot of it here. Frank Vogel said that media day, that they are at a disadvantage when it comes to personnel, traditionally impactful defensive players. There are not a lot of them on the roster. What I think I would say another layer deeper than that, though, is that the difference makers that they do have on that end are all relatively young and inexperienced. That's sort of how this ended up. Nasir Little, Keita Bates-Diop, Josh Okogie, Jordan Goodwin, all of those guys are within their first handful of seasons in the NBA. And I know in the case of Bates-Diop or Okogie, you're talking about like year 5. Okay, I'm certainly understanding of not wanting to give too much leeway on that, but the reality is the inexperience part matters just as much, and you're asking guys to step in and not only just impact the game, but set a tone as inexperienced newcomers on a super team. That's not really that's a big ask. And so those are all explainable things, and yet I will throw this out one more time. Another explainable thing. To circle back to Beal and the injuries. It's only been 24 minutes. There's been a lot of referencing of that statistic. Only 24 minutes played for Booker, Beal, and Durant. What's not cited as often is that trio has an offensive rating of 138 and a defensive rating of 110. Now, that is a microscopic sample. I'm certainly not saying that trio is going to be the best trio in the NBA as soon as it gets healthy. There are things to work out. But we've seen the offense flow, and we have seen it look pretty damn unguardable when they've played. And the number that I will throw at you again, as I've said, I think on almost every show for a couple of weeks now, and it increased and improved in the Portland game despite the loss. Booker, Gordon, Allen, Durant, Nurkic is now plus like 27 per 100 possessions as far as net rating is concerned. So that's an explainable part of why they've succeeded, and I think that matters too. But I think it's reasonable also here to take a look at what actually, realistically, could change. New owner syndrome is a plague in the NBA, and we know Matt Ishbia is nothing if not active. What could actually be done if these issues continue? I'll answer that question next. First, today's show is brought to you by Betterhelp. Betterhelp is changing the game when it comes to therapy. Whether or not your family gives gifts during the holidays, you get to define how you give to yourself, and the holidays are a great time to do that. So whether it's by starting therapy, going easier on yourself during the tough moments, or treating yourself to a day of complete rest, remember to give yourself some love this holiday season. Plenty of people in my family have benefited from therapy. I think that it is, whether it's legitimate, I want to talk about this, or just something where you have an opportunity to talk through something, to have somebody who will listen and bounce ideas off of, can be so valuable. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's solely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Fill out BetterHelp's brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. In the season of giving, give yourself what you need with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Let's close out the show. What's realistic? What could actually change? I want to address the coach situation because I don't think it's insane considering the track record and history that Kevin Young has with this organization. The fact that we know that there were most likely, I would assume, Booker, some support from him for Young to become the head coach. The fact that the offense has been such a train wreck at times, despite the insulation from a roster and talent standpoint that the team was supposed to have there. And the fact that they paid him so much to stick around, I don't know if I said that, all make me feel like Kevin Young could be installed and that Frank Vogel could be fired. Okay? One thing about how the Suns made their head coaching decision by not getting the biggest, flashiest name, for instance, is that I believe Frank Vogel is only on a 4-year contract. They are not paying Monty Williams anymore because he found a new job in Detroit. And I would imagine that Vogel is making like a middling salary compared to other coaches. That all means that moving on from him would not be difficult logistically. But moving on from head coach, and I'm not like speaking about this casually. I mean, obviously I go into these games and I talk to Frank Vogel, and I think he has done fine with the hand that he's been dealt until the past 2 weeks. And if the way that the past 2 weeks have gone continues, then I think it's reasonable to have a conversation, even in year one, considering the stakes and the urgency that this organization is operating with. You can't be all in and have exceptions to that policy. I've seen this get compared to the Terry Porter situation in Phoenix. And it's different for one reason, right? Terry Porter came in with the idea that he would improve the defense for a team that was offensively inclined. The problem, and the reason I think there's a distinction, and I honestly, in general, kind of think it's like we don't have to only pick comparisons from Suns history when we're talking about the Suns. I'm sure there's a better example out there somewhere that I will find if we actually get down the line with the player potentially, or with the coach potentially being fired. But the reason I don't think it's similar to Vogel is Porter didn't just say, I'm going to run the defense and make this defense good and we'll keep the offense as it was. He was a little too hands-on with the offense. He rubbed a lot of players the wrong way. He seemed to be not well liked, and also was meddling with the one thing that was working, which was the 7 seconds or less offense. And of course, he's replaced by Alvin Gentry, and by the about 18 months later, they're in the Western Conference Finals again under Gentry playing that similar style. Excuse me. So, I think Vogel is not out of the question that Vogel could be let go, but I don't think it's as simple as saying it's because they brought in the defensive guy and he didn't make it work and it's just like Terry Porter. No, it's more complicated than that, and I think we're a long ways off from it happening. I don't think it's imminent. Trades. I certainly think a trade could happen. I've said that multiple times, but it's going to be a very finely threaded needle. The Suns do not have a lot to give up. They have to find players who fit into their trade exceptions, most likely. They have to, if not, they have to convince these guys on minimum contracts to accept the trade because they have a no-trade clause by signing one-year contracts for the minimum with the player option for the second season. Or I guess, and they have to convince a team to take on some of these pretty measly seconds that they have or concoct more when it comes to these pick swaps and things. It is going to be very difficult to find anything really, truly impactful. We know the buyout market is a 50-50 proposition at best. Just ask last year's Suns team about how much Terrence Ross necessarily affected them. Not too much, right? So, look, I think a trade could happen. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw one come down, if not a buyout acquisition. But I wouldn't expect it to be somebody that is going to be game-changing. And if you're not talking about that, then is it a flip of a Nasir Little or a Grayson Allen or a Yusuf Nurkic? I mean, crazier things have happened. Those guys certainly have more value than, second-round picks do, or a minimum contract player who hasn't contributed much. But that is a big disruption. Those three guys they got for Ayton all started in Portland. And I know that's partially because of injuries to other players and inconsistency from other players, but that's still true. They're relying on those guys heavily. So if you're moving one, are you improving on that spot, or is it another wild card? Is it another question mark? I don't think there's an easy answer on the trade market. Beyond those two options, firings and trades, you're just kind of crossing your fingers. People who want to disrupt the power structure of this team again, it's not happening. You sound crazy. They're not trading two top 12 at worst players in Durant and Booker. It's not going to happen. So they got to find answers elsewhere. I think there's plenty of them, but the reality is a lot of them still are unexplainable. That'll wrap us up for the day. Back tomorrow to close out the week with Aaron Edwards. If anything worthy of a podcast happens in Suns Kings, you will get a bonus show on Friday night as well. So hit follow or subscribe. Don't forget to sign up for Locked On Suns Insider text alerts. You'll have a video breakdown later this week on the text feed as well. I'll catch you guys tomorrow.
Thank you.